Hi everyone, I'm Sam. I'm a third-year PhD student at the Theory Center at Columbia, and I'm really excited to be talking about my recent work on compositional generalization with Kim Starkenfeld. So as a brief motivation, humans routinely think about the world in compositional terms. So for instance, if we know what a circle is, and we know the color red, we can immediately imagine a red circle. So this kind of compositional representation enables us to generalize to seemingly radically novel situations by understanding them as being composed of familiar components. However, despite this also this is a hallmark of intelligence in humans and animals, and it's also been seen as really important for machine learning models more broadly. Now, despite this importance, the basis of compositional generalization has remained relatively poorly understood, and an important challenge in this context is the sheer range of different compositional tasks you can imagine. So if you understand what your model does on a certain task, it's not necessarily clear how it would do on a very different compositional task. And so really what we'd like is a theory that formally clarifies the relationship across a broad range of compositional tasks. Now, to make progress on this question, we considered kernel models with fixed representations, which are more broadly a popular theoretical model to better understand what deep neural networks do. So as input, we considered some kind of input, and we considered a pre-trained model that extracts a disentangled representation from this input, representing different components categorically, and as a technical requirement, each component was represented with equal similarity to each other component. This can be followed by some kind of nonlinear transformation, and finally a linear readout that's learned, for instance, via gradient descent or ridge regression. We then trained the model on certain combinations of components and tested it on all other remaining combinations of components. So now I'm going to tell you how models with fixed representations generalize on these kinds of compositional tasks. Importantly, our only requirement is this technical assumption about the representation, as well as that we only have a fixed number of input components. And so despite this relatively broad range of possible tasks, we identified a very concrete constraint on the kinds of compositional computations these kernel models can implement. So specifically, they add up a value assigned to each component, as well as combination of components that they've seen during training. So let's look at what this looks like in the simplest case with two components. In that case, for the training set, you add up a value assigned to each single component as well as the combination of both components. In contrast, on the test set, the model hasn't seen the specific combination of components and is therefore constrained to adding up a value assigned to each component by itself. And so what that means is that the model can learn arbitrary training data, but is constrained to an additive computation on the test set. And so that means that on any task that involves a non-additive compositional computation, we already know that the kernel model can't possibly solve that. Now, in addition to being additive, the model also needs to learn to assign the correct values to its different components. And so to look at what can go wrong in that case, we looked as an example at this symbolic addition task. So in this case, the model should infer a magnitude associated with each component and then add them together. By theoretically solving the behavior of the kernel model, we found that gradient descent causes it to assign a certain magnitude to the conjunctive component. That drops out once we're on the test set. And that in turn distorts the additive values used to generate predictions on the test set, which in turn means that the kernel model underestimates its inferred values by a proportional factor. We then set out to test this behavior in deep neural networks, conjecturing that for these kinds of additive tasks, understanding neural network behavior might actually help, understanding kernel behavior might actually help us also better understand how neural networks might fail on compositional generalization. To do so, we trained them on a symbolic addition version of using various image data sets, and we found that across different architectures as well as data sets, the test set behavior was not only additive, but also underestimated the inferred values. And so in sum, I've told you that kernel models are constrained to these additive computations, that this class of conjunction-wise additivity might be a useful compositional generalization class across a broad range of tasks, and that both kernel models and deep neural networks can suffer from this memorization leak that deteriorates performance. Now, in the paper, we also looked at more complicated tasks, as well as how feature learning can help us overcome these issues. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, come see me at the poster or check out the preprint. Thanks.